Good morning. How are we doing? 6 of you are good. Is it you're afraid or what? No, it's good. It's good to have you here. Thanks so much for being here. Very good to see all of you. Like Eddie said, we're in the final part of the series we're doing called Fear Not. And today I want to close out by talking about I think it's a universal fear that we as humans have. I think it's something that we all face. It may not be something that we think of first when we think of fear, but I think it's one of the most important ones to deal with. And to get into this idea, to get into this topic, to get into this discussion, because I think Christianity has one of the best solutions. Possibly, as we're going to see, I think it's one of the best solutions that we can apply to try and navigate this fear that all of us, I think, need to navigate. So to get into this, I want to ask a pretty blunt question. I typically try to ease into the message usually, and as I was preparing this, I'm like, let's go all the way. And so bear with me if it feels awkward and blunt. I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask this question, and then we dive into this and see if we can navigate this universal fear that we all face. So here's the question. What is it in us that fears punishment? What is it in you? Because I think this is real of me, and I think this is real of all of us as humans, that has something in us that has this sort of inkling that fears that we're going to get in trouble. The best way that I can describe it is this, and maybe you felt this. When you're driving down the road, perfectly legally, you know that feeling? Everything's great. Not texting and driving, that's gone. Speed limit, you're like 2 or 3 miles below the speed limit. It's great. You're using your indicator. The blinker. It's working. Everything's great. Everything's great. And then this guy shows up next to you. What do you feel? Right? What I do is my brakes. Whoa, hit the brake really quick. Something's wrong. Did I use the indicator? What's going on? Is he going to pull me over? Did I do something wrong? I don't know. Do I have my license? I think everything's fine. I think it's fine, but I feel guilty. Why do I feel guilty? What is it in me that feels like I'm going to get punished? And the funny thing is, I actually spoke to a police officer about this as well. And just to hear his perspective, and he was like, you know what's crazy? I feel the same thing. He's like, I hate it when people, everybody slows down and they drive too slow in front of us, then it's frustrating, and they're worried that they didn't use their blinker. He told me this, and then he said this to me. He said, and you know what happens with me? When my supervisor calls me in, I'm like, oh no, what's wrong? Have you ever felt that? The boss calls, leaves a message, I need to see you tomorrow. What do we feel? What is that thing in us that fears punishment? There's something in us, there's some sort of inkling in there that makes me feel like I'm going to get in trouble, makes me feel like I haven't done what I was supposed to do, even though we've done it. And we feel that, and I think it's a universal human experience that when authority, when justice, when boss, when supervisor shows up, we're like, oh no, what have I done wrong? Even though my 10 and 2, my hands are 10 and 2. It's all good. What's wrong? And I just feel guilty. What is that? I think there's probably a whole bunch of reasons for this. The two ideas that I want to dive into, the two ideas that I think push that feeling in us. I want to speak a bit about those. The first one, I think, is this, that we have a sense inside of us. There's just this weird sense inside of us that if we were evaluated, we would probably fall short. And I think this is a human experience, that if somehow we were put in front of a tribunal, put in front of people that are going to, work through your life, what have you done, what have you not done, shine a spotlight onto every motive, onto every thought, onto every action, onto every interaction with people, if we were evaluated, truly evaluated, I think we all have a sense that we're probably going to fall short. One of my favorite authors, Tim Keller, wrote a book called Jesus the King, and he says it so brilliantly. He describes this feeling inside of us so brilliantly. So instead of me trying to say it in my words, I thought I'd read his words. It's a little bit of a long little portion, so I'm going to put it up on the screen so you can follow along on the screen, but I'm going to read it out the book because he describes that sense in us, that all of us as humans, it feels like if I don't want to show everything because I'm probably not good enough. I'm probably going to fall short, and it's just the human experience. So let me read this as it describes this so well. He says this, we live in a world now where we don't believe in judgment, don't believe in sin, and yet we still feel that there's something wrong with us. Our postmodern, post-Christian somewhat world says, sin, let's just everybody's truth is everybody's truth. That's how we feel. I don't believe that there's judgment. Let's just be you. Just do good, love people, and you'll be fine. And he says, so we live in that world where we don't believe in this judgment stuff, the sin stuff, and yet there's still something in us that feels there's something wrong with us. Though we've abandoned the ancient categories, religious ancient categories, mostly in this postmodern society, we still somehow have a profound, inescapable sense that if we were examined, we'd be rejected. We have a deep sense that we've got to hide our true self, or at least control what people know about us. Secretly, we feel that we aren't acceptable, that we have to prove to ourselves and to others that we're worthy, lovable, valuable. It's fascinating. And he continues to talk about this idea that we struggle with this thing. Why do we work so very hard, always saying, if I can just get to this level, then I can relax? And we never do relax once we get there. We just work and work. What is driving us? Why is it that some of us can never allow ourselves to disappoint anybody? We have no boundaries, no matter what people ask of us, how much they exploit us, trample on us, because to disappoint somebody is a form of death. Why does that possibility bother us so much? What is it inside of us that bothers us so much about that? Where are all the self-doubts coming from, Tim Keller asks. And then he sort of repeats it. He says, you don't believe in sin, you don't believe in judgment, you don't believe in guilt, and yet you know somehow that you're unclean. You may psychologize it. I have a complex, my parents didn't love me enough, I'm a victim, I have self-esteem issues, but there's no escaping the fact that we all have a sense that we're unclean. It feels like it's a human experience. And it sort of comes up when we feel like, am I going to be examined? Or the authority shows up, the cop shows up, the boss calls, oh no, there's something wrong, I've done that, and it just feels like there's the sense inside of us. And I think that sense inside of us leads to, in part, to this feeling that I have this fear that I'm going to be punished. I have a fear of punishment. So that's the first idea, that we feel like if we were evaluated, if we feel like we were judged, if we feel like we had a light shone on us, we would not measure up. The second one is this, that we have an innate desire for justice. As human beings, I believe not only do we feel like if we were evaluated that we'd probably fall short, but we have this innate desire for justice. Every one of us has a desire for justice. And we know this. If I came to you and I stole something from you, that justice desire would probably rise up in you, going, you owe me. If someone does something, justice, we want justice, but if we know it so clearly when someone does something against you, someone takes something, someone hurts you, someone hurts someone you love, and that thing rises up in you, that thing rises up in me that says, no, where is the justice? You owe me. You need to pay for what you did. You need to bring back. You need to fix what you wronged. We have this thing in us as human beings. We are fair people. We want fair. We want just. Another area we see this desire for justice is when, and Twitter and social media and just shows this so much, but we get to see wrongs around the world. And when we see wrongs being done around the world and the wrongs aren't made right, people get away with something horrendous. People get away with something they shouldn't have done, and it's clear that they were wrong. What happens in our hearts? We go, that's not fair. Where is the justice? How can they get away with that? We desire justice. And we throw that on God as well. When we see bad people, however you define bad people in your mind, bad people, evil people, we go, why doesn't God fix this? Why doesn't God change this? We just have this desire for justice. We want things to be just. It's interesting, though, about that desire for justice that we all share and we all want, especially when someone does something against us. There are some places where our desire for justice gets a little blurred. There's some times, and I'm guessing you'd probably recognize this in your own life. And the first place where our desire for justice gets blurred? When we do something wrong, right? Because then, wait. Let me explain. You don't understand my story. You don't understand the mitigating circumstances. And if you only understood the mitigating circumstances, you don't know what I meant to do, officer. I didn't mean it. Can I have grace? No. If someone cuts me off and is going fast, where is the justice? Where are the police officers? Come on, let's get them. When I'm driving too fast, I'm late. I got to get there. My child, I've got a hospital, work, meeting, whatever it is. Justice gets a little blurred, right? When it's against me. We want justice against everybody else, but when it's against me, that desire for justice gets blurred a little. There's another area where desire for justice gets blurred, and this one gets a little sensitive, I think. This one gets a little tough because it becomes religious. It becomes kind of bigger than us. Our desire for justice also gets blurred when it comes to God and when God is the judge. You know, we don't like that, I think. And sometimes I wonder why. You know, if we had a sense that God was God, and I don't know where you're at with God, and if you're like, I don't know if there is a God really, but someone invited me and they told me there's free lunch after church, so sweet, I'm here for that. And I'm so stoked you're here for that. That's awesome. And we don't mind if you're at the place where you don't understand or don't buy into some of this stuff. That's awesome. We love having you here. But this is the part where it gets difficult. If you don't buy into God like being God, or God being the ultimate overseer of justice. This is weird. And I think it's weird because I can't control it. Like, I want to control what I can control. And when someone bigger than me, outside of me, that I don't know or trust, or I don't know if he's good or what, starts to control justice, and then that, you know, and I'm fine with it if it's justice against the other evil people. But when it's against me for something that I don't even know if I agree that that's wrong. I mean, come on, if I was God, that would be right. But if God is there, my desire for justice gets a little blurred. But listen, if God is true, again, and I don't know where you're at, but if God is God, then it would likely make sense that God should probably be the ultimate overseer of justice. And yet, in both of these areas, even though we love justice, I mean, we create justice systems. We create the legal system. We have punishment for certain things that if you do this wrong, you will be punished. Well, not you, everybody else will be punished, right? They should be, because that's just. We create systems. We love justice. We desire justice. But when justice falls on us, we're like, oh, well. And when justice is in the hands of God, that feels weird. And our desire for justice is just a little, what do I do with that? And I think that's just the reality. So take these two things into account, and let's go back to that first question of what is it in us that fears punishment? I think that feeling inside of us that when the boss calls, like, what's wrong? When the cop comes, what am I doing wrong? That feeling inside of us that fears justice, I believe, comes from these two aspects. If we were to be evaluated, if someone evaluated us, there's this sense, this inkling, this feeling that we probably fall short. We don't measure up to them. What is that? Why is that there? And then also, when we don't measure up, because we know justice is right, because we want justice, because we desire justice, if we don't measure up, there's probably a just punishment. There's probably a just consequence. And that leads to this fear. Now, I don't know what to call that fear. And when this comes to God, that gets even worse. There's something in us that feels like this, and then if God is God, and if He is the ultimate overseer of justice, then this just gets a little haywire, and I think that creates something in us, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is a universal human experience, that this creates something that I'm calling, I don't know what to call it, so I called it spiritual fear. That there's this semblance, there's this thing in humans. And if you look at history, this is why so many systems to try and please the gods were created. So many things that when something went wrong in life, we didn't make a right sacrifice. One of the gods is angry. We've got to do something different to please the gods. And as we do that, and religious systems are made, and if I do certain things, then maybe I'll be good enough to please God. Another place where this spiritual fear thing comes in is that question we ask when something goes wrong in our lives. If you ever ask this, what did I do to deserve this? Why is this happening to me? And what we're saying kind of, and I think, Christians, non-Christians, church people, not church people, kind of go here. When something goes wrong in life and there's this God concept out there, we go, what did I do to deserve this? And it's almost like we're saying, God must be punishing me for doing something wrong. And this whole, I don't measure up, and this whole justice desire inside of me, what did I do to deserve this. And there's the spiritual fear that dominates us sometimes, that impacts us sometimes. The other place that this is such a reality, and this is not something fun to talk about in church and from stage, but it is a reality for all of us as humans, is that at some point in our lives, we're going to come to the end of our life. And this is where this comes up. When you come to the end of your life and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm done, then the thoughts come, was I good enough? Because I don't know what's next. I don't know. I can't control that part. And I think there's something out there. I think there's a next. I think there's an eternal. I think there's something. Oh, and a spiritual fear checks in. Like, have I done enough? Am I good enough? Am I not? And if I get, evaluated, I'm probably going to fall short. And I know that because I don't even live up to my own standards, let alone if God has standards. I know I don't measure up to a perfect God's standards. And if there is justice, which I want and I love and I like and I want to see it happen, but if there is justice and I don't measure up, where does that leave us? I think it leaves the human race with a sense of spiritual fear. There's a verse that just says this so brilliantly, and it's just so concise. In one of the letters that the Apostle John wrote, I'm going to talk a bit about him in a minute, but it says this: fear has to do with punishment. Fear has to do with punishment, and there's something in us that worries. It's concerned that we don't measure up, and there is justice, and what happens if we don't do? So what do we do with that spiritual fear? How do we handle that? How do we navigate that? Because I think it's something that we all face. What do we do with it? I think there's a bunch of different things that we do. I've put a few on the board, and I want to show you some of these responses in no particular order. But some of the things that we do when we feel spiritual fear is this. Number one, we run from religion. And I think we do this because if God is just and I don't measure up, that just doesn't feel nice. And so rather than accepting that and acknowledging that, and I don't blame you if you do this, I mean, especially if your picture of God is just this, mean God, which, I mean, there's a lot of pictures of God out there that just feel so weird and like God's going to get you. If that's the picture of God and there's this justice thing and this thing that I feel inside, I would rather just not be a part of it. Let me just leave it alone and run from religion. I don't want to be a part of that. And if I just ignore it, and I don't believe in it, and I don't think it's true, then I'm not going to be affected by it, thankfully. And maybe I can get rid of that spiritual fear, that thing inside of me. Second one sort of related to this, that sometimes we doubt or question God's existence. We say, okay, if that's what God's like, and if I feel this fear thing, then if I just don't believe there is a God. And I think Christians face this, Christians who say we believe in God, when something bad happens and we've got this spiritual fear thing, we've got this fear of punishment and we think God's doing something to us, then we will question, well, if God's like that, then I don't think He exists. And if I don't think He exists, then I don't have to worry about this thing inside of me. The problem, though, that I've sensed, the problem that I've seen as I've read, as I've interacted with people, is that neither of those take that thing away. It doesn't remove this anxiety, this, and again, we try to hide it, try to, not worry about it, but this doesn't take away that human experience of, I'm worried. When the cop pulls up, I'm worried. When I'm coming to the end of my life, I'm worried. Even if I don't, I'm like worried. Is there a way to fix that? Is there a way to get rid of that? On the other side of the spectrum, how do we deal with spiritual fear? On the other side of the spectrum, this is what we sometimes do. We become incredibly devout religious people. Because if there's a requirement that I need to be good and be religious and do all the stuff that God says I must do, then if I can do them well, I don't have to worry. I'm taken care of. And so we spend our lives giving ourselves to do church and read the Bible and give money and do all this stuff, thinking that if I can just do enough, then when I'm examined and evaluated, then I'll be fine. The problem is, we know our hearts and our minds. We know that even in the good, there's still some of the stuff behind the scenes. That even in the good, we know the motivation is sometimes not there. Even in the relationships, when things come out, we know. And if I was truly examined by a perfect God, then being good, how good is good enough? And it doesn't take the fear away. It doesn't take that spiritual thing away. Another thing we do, which is kind of related to this, is once we're really good at certain things, even if we're not good at all of them, once we're good at some, then we kind of become judgmental. And this is what happens in Christianity sometimes. We're so good at doing the things that we're good at. We're not good at doing the things that we're not good at, which is interesting. Very simple concept. And yet we lean on the things we're good at. And then we judge others who are not good at the things we're good at. And we don't talk about the things they're good at because we're not good at those. You're following. We become judgmental. And if there's a spiritual thing, and if I can be judgmental, I'm better than you, then at least I'm better than you. So we think that'll solve it. Last thing we do, and I think this is the epidemic. I think this is the one that we all do, Christians, non-Christians, everybody. When we sense this fear, this thing of, am I enough? What's happening? What's going on? We distract ourselves. I mean, if I can call it that, the distraction industry in this country is worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. Netflix, social media, football. We will do whatever we can to distract ourselves from feeling this fear. You know why? Because we hate feeling this. We hate feeling. We don't want to feel not good enough, and we don't want to feel like, oh, if I'm not good enough, what's going to happen? And so we distract ourselves with just distractions. We distract ourselves with work. We give ourselves to work, and you go, 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 go. And if I can succeed, then I don't have to worry about this. Distract ourselves with relationships, and we're fine and great when the relationship's working. When the relationship breaks down, we're like, oh no, there it's back, and I got to find another relationship. This is epidemic in our world. What do we do with spiritual fear? We do a bunch of stuff to try and get rid of it. The problem is when all the lights are off and the noise stops, and I'm alone, somehow that feeling of if I'm evaluated remains. And if justice is just, then I'm probably not going to measure up. And I don't like that feeling. And this is why, well, before I say this is why, if you have done any of these things, I just want to say, I don't blame you. Nobody likes that. And all of us will do everything we can to not feel the sense of inadequacy and not good enough, and the punishment might come. We're like, what is that? Nobody wants to feel that. So if you've chosen any one of these things, I don't blame you. I've chosen different ones at different times in my life to try and get rid of that feeling. Listen, we're all human. We all struggle with this stuff, and doing something like this makes sense. It's a normal reaction to try and get rid of that spiritual fear. So if you've done that, I don't blame you. The sad part for me is, I'm sure you've discovered, they don't work. They don't get rid of that thing ultimately. And that's what we wish we could have. Get rid of that internal tension ultimately, so we don't have to walk in fear of that weird punishment thing that we walk with. We don't have to. And that's why I love Christianity, because Christianity, I think, offers such an incredible solution that literally actually takes care of it, so that we can walk confidently at peace and never have to worry about this weird, inadequate judgment. What's going to happen? We don't have to worry about it because Christianity has an incredible, incredible solution. So I want to look at that solution. And the way that I'm going to look at it is I want to read a portion of a letter that one of Jesus' closest friends and followers wrote. And the reason I point out that he was one of his closest friends and followers is because that means his name was John. And John literally walked with Jesus, lived with Jesus, followed him for like 3.5 years, and learned everything there was to know about him. John was like you and me, that he didn't believe in miracles like he hadn't seen a miracle. So like how does that work? And then Jesus did a miracle. And you're like, I don't believe in that. But how do I explain that? And as he watched him, and as he heard him, and as he saw him teach, and then as he heard him say that he's going to die and rise again, I'm sure John went, Jesus, don't say that, because that ruins everything. Because when you do die and you don't rise again, everything you said can be thrown out the window because you're a liar. But then he died. And John was so close to him that he was standing literally in front of the cross, in earshot of Jesus, next to Jesus' mother. And Jesus looked at John and said, please take care of her. That's how close John was. And then Jesus died, and everything sort of seemed to be falling apart. And then a few days later, John had breakfast with Jesus on the beach. And everything changed. And in that moment, John realized that Jesus was different. Jesus was different to anything he'd ever experienced. This is John's experience. And he said, there's a solution to this internal human issue of fear that we have, and I want you to know it. And so he wrote this letter to a group of Christians just to sort of explain this. I want to read a part of this. Here's what he says. Dear friends, and he starts by laying a foundation, the most important foundation that we have to have as we deal with God. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God, and here it is, because God is love. The foundation that we need to understand if we're going to navigate life in relation to God, if we're going to navigate this whole fear thing of how does this work if I don't measure up, because I know I don't measure up to my own standards, and if God has standards, I know I don't measure up to those, but then if there's justice, how does that work? And that creates fear in me. The foundation of dealing with that fear is to know this, that God is love. That God is love, John says. You got to know that first. Sometimes, we wonder, is he? When things go bad, is he? When bad things happen to good people, is he? John knew that those questions would come up, and so he said, here's how I know that God is love. He said this. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. In other words, if someone is willing to die for you, you probably don't have to question their motives. If someone's willing to give their life for you, you probably don't have to go, well, I don't know if they like me really. No, they love you. And so John says, we know that God is love because he died for us. Now, I just want to point something out here, which is an interesting theological question that some people struggle with. Why did God send his one and only Son? Like, that sounds like, why didn't he do it? Like that, a dad sending his son, that sounds a little like child abuse. I've heard this question. It sounds a little like, and seriously, people struggle with this. In studying it, it's like, that sounds like an awful God. Why would he send his son? That's awful. I wouldn't send my son. Sheesh. What I need to explain to you is this, that Jesus, this wasn't like God going, ha, my son. He wasn't doing that. God and Jesus are one. When this decision was made, if we can put it that way, Jesus and God, Jesus as God said, I'm going to give my life for these people. This wasn't a God going, well, you're the son, I'm the dad. This was God deciding to give his life for people. So this is not a child abuse thing. This is not a weird thing. This is God giving his life for people. John continues. He says this. This is love. This is love. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us, which is huge because so often we think that our goodness, that our okayness with God, that our righteousness, that our evaluation is dependent on how well we love. No. John says, no, you can't love God enough. You don't have it in you to be good enough. This is not that we loved God, but that he loved us. This is dependent on his love. If you're ever going to get over the spiritual fear, if you're ever going to get over this thing in you that says, oh, what's going to happen? We need to know that this is about how he loved us and sent his son, this is so important, as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. The reason this is important is because in this little verse, John confirms those feelings that we have. That if we were to be evaluated, we would, not probably, but we would fall short. That we would fall short because none of us have lived up to everything. We haven't lived up to our own standards. We try, but we struggle. And if there is a God and he has standards, none of us, not one of us have lived up to those standards. So in this little verse, John is saying, yes, if you're going to evaluate, if you're going to be evaluated, like really evaluated, you won't measure up. But I know that, and I'm not afraid of that. What I'm going to do is that fine that you owe, I'm going to pay it. That's what an atoning sacrifice is. The punishment, because you know that you won't measure up and you want justice, you know that justice is needed, and so there's this thing in me, what I'm going to do is know you don't measure up, and I'm going to pay the fine. The justice will be taken care of in me. I'm going to take care of it, Jesus said. And in that, he took care of the justice, and he acknowledged the mess inside of us won't measure up, but he said, that's okay. And in this way, He's offering us a way that we don't have to have a fear that we don't measure up, because we don't, and he still loves us. And that justice must be served. You know why? Because justice has been served. And if we can accept that, we don't have to live with this internal spiritual fear that we often walk with. He continues, he says this, he skipped 3 verses, because the next 3 verses that I skipped over here, he's talking about how we love each other. But I wanted to continue with the same argument, which he continues over here. He says, and I love this, he says, and we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. I love that word over there. You know why? Because this makes it real. This isn't some religious thing that some guy made up, like, yeah, this is how it works. No, John saw Jesus, talked to him, shook his hand, stood eyeball to eyeball with him. He knew, he saw, and now he's saying, listen, that thing in us that we struggle with, I have found the answer. I have found it, and here it is. We have seen it, and now I want to tell you all about it, that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world, to save us from that mess where we don't measure up. We don't have to be afraid that we don't measure up, because we don't. It's true. We don't measure up, but he's come to save us from it, to pay the price for that so that it's taken care of. We don't have to fear any ultimate consequences about that, and he's the Savior to take us away from the fear of all that mess. That's what he says. I've seen it. And please, he's begging us, like saying, come on, you've got to know this. It's the best thing. And then he says, how do we make sure that what he has done, we can apply that to that fear that we have? How do we do that? Here's what he says. If anyone, doesn't matter what you've done, what you haven't done, where you've been, lifestyle, whatever it is, if anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, this is the solution Christianity offers to that human problem of the fear of what is going to happen. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them and they in God. He says it's that simple. That we all have this thing, and we've tried a bunch of stuff to get rid of this worry, this fear of, if I'm evaluated, I'm not good enough. And what happens to justice? Because I want justice. I don't want it for me, but I want it for everybody else. What happens? He says, yeah, this is how you handle it. You acknowledge that Jesus is the Son of God who came and knows we don't measure up, but paid the price for that. God lives in them, and they in God. This is amazing. Simple. Clear, powerful answer. And then he says this. And so we know. John says, we know, and we rely on the love God has for us. Remember, God is love. That's who he is. He does not want anybody to be living in this fear thing, to have that sort of drive them. God is love. And whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. Whoever applies that, accepts that, acknowledges that, he has done this. We don't have to live with this underlying spiritual fear of what is next, of being caught out, of not being good enough, because he said, I know you're not good enough, but I am good enough, and I'm going to give that to you. And then he wraps up this whole conversation, and I love how he does this. He says this. It's a little awkward, but I love it. He says, this is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. Every time you mention the day of judgment, it gets a little awkward. But what is he saying? He says we can have confidence. He's taking care of this. We can have confidence, not fear, on the day of judgment. Now, the day of judgment is something that's so interesting, and I looked up what John, because John wrote this in Greek, and I wanted to know what he's talking about here, because when we hear day of judgment, this is usually what we hear. God's going to throw all the bad people in hell. And that's awful. And that's like, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? John's not talking about that here. If he was talking about that here, this word would mean condemn. The Greek word. It would be condemn people. You know when a judge the judgment has happened and he says, now it's I'm giving you your sentence. It's sentencing. It's, hit the gavel down, you're going away to prison for the rest of your life. Death sentence, whatever it is, the judge does that. This word is not condemn. When he talks about the day of judgment, what he's talking about is evaluation. Clear perfect, absolute evaluation. The Greek word he uses here for judgment is the word krisis, okay? And what it means is this: it's the content of the process of judging. It's evaluation. It's shining a spotlight on every part of our lives going, let's see. It's judge in a righteous manner or judge according to true standards. Now, isn't that what we want? Like if we have committed a crime, if we have been caught or accused of something, don't we want a fair trial? We don't want to get there and go, well, this is who you are, you're done, go. No, we want a fair trial where everything can come to the fore, every bit of information can be laid out, and then, if I am guilty, and we find that absolutely clear, then I guess because I need justice and I want justice, I'll have to go with that, of course. But we want a fair trial. And when he talks about the day of judgment in this thing, he's talking about evaluation. Now, I'm going to make a hard left turn here because I want to use an illustration, the best illustration I can explain this word with. And I'm going from something super spiritual to something just normal, okay? So are you with me? I think the best explanation of this word judgment is, you know, in football, when a play happens and someone throws the ball, the quarterback throws the ball, and the wide receiver grabs the ball, and you don't know if his toe dragged just enough in the end zone to score the touchdown, and the one team's going, yeah, we won the game, it's in the last minute, everything's awesome, but the other team's going, no, and then you look at the referee, and he's caught the ball, and he's held it, and his toe is dragged, and the referee goes, no touchdown. And half the crowd is just freaking out and throwing things at the TV, and like everything's going crazy, and you're like, I know, I saw it. What does the coach who just lost his touchdown do? Red flag. Throws out the red flag. This is what he does, right? Woo! And his team is going, yes, we're going to get a true, proper evaluation of this situation, because how can you make a decision like that with not even knowing? It's a split second, you need to have all the information, right? So he throws a red flag. Then what happens? Doesn't it go to New York? Does it still go to New York? I think it still goes to New York. And this is how New York looks. We've got every angle possible, looking at all the stuff. We slow it down. We look at every single angle. We slow motion. And then you get to see that toe. And you see those tiny little rubber pieces in the AstroTurf going boop, 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 boop. And you're like, yes, he scored, because you have every single angle, and you've been able to slow it down, see it from this side, 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 see it from every side, because you are having a proper evaluation. That's what that judgment means. Now let me ask you, if there was a camera on you from every angle, and it was slowed down of every part of your life and my life, and every thought, and every motive, and every hidden thing, how would you feel? No, just one quick decision. I'm good. I caught the ball. And that judgment, it's a fair, true, honest, every angle, every picture judgment of who we are. And this is what John says. He says this. This is how love is complete among us, so that we will have confidence in that day of true evaluation of your life and mine. If we are going to be truly evaluated, there is something in us that says we fall short. There's something in us that knows we fall short. We know we don't live up to that. There's something in us that's afraid. And if we believe in justice, which we do, we create the justice system. There's something in us that says, if I'm evaluated, I don't measure up. And if justice needs to be served, justice needs to be served. And there's that thing in us. Do I live up to it? And then John comes along and says, we will have confidence in that day, that no matter what is seen, no matter what is evaluated, no matter how many angles your life is looked at, you and I can have confidence. Do you know why? John says, because in this world, we are like Jesus. How are we like Jesus? By doing all this stuff? No, we fall so far short of Jesus. There's no way. But by acknowledging that he died for our imperfections, our mistakes, our evaluations, our inappropriate toe drag. He died for all of that. And then you know what he did? He caught the touchdown ball. I was flailing around trying to think, how do I fix this? How do I run away? How do I not do this? And he walked up and he caught the touchdown ball. And you know what he did? He handed it to me. And I took it and I slammed it on the ground. And I was so happy. You know why? That's what Christianity teaches. It says you couldn't catch the ball. And when you can't catch the ball, there's a fear of, oh no, did I measure up? And if I don't measure up, I know justice is needed. I know that's there. And if God is God, then surely He's the ultimate overseer of justice. And that scares me. But Christianity comes along and says, it doesn't have to, because Jesus caught the ball and offers it to you. And He says, if you want to get rid of that fear of judgment, fear of punishment, that spiritual fear, all you need to do is take the ball. All you need to do is acknowledge that He's done that. And I'm telling you, this is so beautiful. That fear dissipates. John ends by saying this. There is no fear in love. Remember, God is love. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Perfect love drives out fear. The most perfect picture of love is the Son of God dying for us. Perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. There it is. And if we're worried about, Jesus took every punishment for every mistake, every sin, everything that it gets in the way. Jesus died for it and then hands us the ball. He ends with one final chilling statement that I think we need to evaluate ourselves by. Every one of us, if you're a Christian, not a Christian, church person, not a church person. This is the final statement. It's chilling. He says this: the one who fears is not made perfect in love. The evaluation that I have for you and for me is this: do you live with that sense of fear? Ultimately, or in life, that God's going to punish me for something I've done. Why is this happening? What have I done to deserve this? Do you live with that sense of fear? Because John would say, if you do, you have not understood His perfect love yet. You have not been made perfect in love. And He's going, please, please, would you see this? It's the most beautiful thing. We've tried everything to get rid of that thing inside of us. And Jesus is going, take the ball. Take the ball. Hold the ball. I caught it. It's good. It doesn't matter if you messed it up. I've died for that. There is no more punishment. I have paid all the punishment. If you accept that ball, and you won't have to walk with that. It's a beautiful portion of Scripture. Perfect love drives out fear. So we're going to end with a song. And it's a song that Dee Dee and the band are going to sing. And you can just listen as you listen to as they sing. But here's what I would love for you to do. I would love for you to evaluate. Am I fearing? Is there fear that drives me? And then wonder, where are you in that process? Are you someone who's acknowledged Jesus and you've taken that, but somehow it's just not perfected yet? Somehow you're not mature in that. Somehow you've not applied that to who God is. Or maybe it's at the point where you're like, I don't know, this bigger fear thing is there. I don't know if I've taken the ball. Just think about that. Consider that. And if you feel comfortable, tell God that as we sing this song. Let me pray for us as the band comes up. Father, thank you. Thank you so much that of all things that you're described as God is love. Wow. And sometimes it doesn't feel like that. Sometimes it doesn't look like that. Sometimes we're confused. But if ever we question the fact that you died for us, hopefully would convince us that you are love. Father, I pray that you help us evaluate our hearts where we are fearing, where we're struggling with that spiritual fear, that thing of where is God? How does this work? Where am I? Am I going to be evaluated? And will I fall short? And then what happens with justice? Where am I with that? And then God, I pray, please, for every one of us, that we would understand that your perfect love casts out fear, drives out fear. And Father, I pray that we will not depend on our ability to catch the ball because we'll drop it, but on your ability, Lord Jesus, to catch that ball. And then thank you for giving it to us and allowing us to celebrate with confidence, even when we get evaluated. Because when we're evaluated, you are the one who's paid the price. We're so grateful. In Jesus' name, amen.